Have you ever looked around and wondered how there's such a staggering variety of physical differences between us humans? Or how those exact same types of adaptations are completely mirrored in the wider animal kingdom? Well, today we're diving into an explainer of a really provocative framework presented in a text called Earth, a Biography of Chaos. It introduces this concept known as the Unified Theory of Geologic History, or UTGH for short, and it offers a completely different lens through which to view the entire timeline of life on our planet.
It is a mystery we literally see every single day, right? I mean, just think about the wild variety of dog breeds out there, or the incredible array of human traits from different skin tones to bone structures. How exactly did all this staggering diversity happen? Now, the conventional answer is that it took tens of thousands or even millions of years. But the source material we are examining today challenges that completely. It asks, what if this happened much, much faster? To get to the bottom of this, we're going to break things down into four main parts: the diversity anomaly, the front-loaded genome, rapid animal adaptation, and finally, the human scattering. Let's get right into it.
Part 1. The diversity anomaly.
Okay, so the standard model, what scientists usually call uniformitarianism, relies really heavily on deep time. The idea is that the diversity we see today is the result of slow, random genetic mutations accumulating over millions of years, just gently guided by natural selection. But the UTGH framework proposes a totally different engine. It argues for rapid, stress-induced biological changes that were triggered by a massive recent planetary catastrophe. Basically, extreme environmental shifts forced organisms to adapt incredibly quickly just to survive.
And what's wild is that both groups are looking at the exact same physical evidence. One group looks at the genetic distance between species and assumes a constant, slow rate of mutation, concluding it must have taken millions of years. But the UTGH researchers look at that identical data and see the aftermath of a sudden, explosive expression of pre-existing traits. So, they aren't disputing the physical data itself, they're fundamentally disputing the engine and the clock that produced it.
Which brings us to part 2, the front-loaded genome.
So if things didn't adapt slowly over millions of years, what exact mechanism allowed them to change so fast? Well, it all comes down to a concept called epigenetic expression. UTGH argues that organisms survived this global catastrophe carrying what the author calls front-loaded genomes. This means their DNA already contained a massive amount of dormant, unexpressed physical traits. When these surviving populations were suddenly thrust into harsh, extreme post-catastrophe environments, that stress rapidly switched existing traits on or off. Think of it like flipping a series of emergency switches in a power grid. No new random mutations were needed at all. The survival traits were already programmed in, just waiting to be activated. The source text actually uses a fantastic metaphor for this. It says, the genome is not a blank page, it is a complete library. Epigenetic expression is the process of finding the right book. So the genome isn't just an empty slate that random mutations slowly write a story on over time. It's already a vast library of information. Epigenetic expression is simply the environment forcing the organism to frantically pull the right survival book off the shelf. The diversity wasn't built from scratch, it was there the whole time.
Now, you might be wondering, how on earth did early animals and humans get such rich, undamaged DNA libraries to begin with? According to the text, the pre-catastrophe environment actually featured a denser atmosphere with heavy UV shielding. This incredibly low UV radiation supposedly allowed early populations to maintain this vast genetic potential without any of the mutational damage and degradation that we experience today. So they entered the post-catastrophe world with maximum informational fidelity. Their genetic libraries were pristine and just packed with adaptive potential.
All right, part 3, rapid animal adaptation.
To really grasp this biological engine, we have to look at the animal kingdom, because it helps us understand the exact same mechanics that drove human differences. The author breaks down animal adaptation into a triad of evidence, specifically using dogs, cats, and horses to demonstrate the sheer speed and breadth of biological change. Under the UTGH framework, you absolutely don't need millions of years to create distinct species. You just need a rich genome and intense environmental pressure.
In fact, UTGH claims the full range of domestic dogs and the entire cat family emerged from single ancestors in just centuries. Just think about dogs for a second. In roughly 150 years of selective breeding, humans pulled out variations ranging from a tiny pocket-sized Chihuahua to a towering Great Dane. The text argues that the harsh Siberian winter essentially did the exact same thing the cats. It pulled the massive, cold-weather traits of a tiger out of the exact same front-loaded genome that can produce a tiny desert sandcat.
And then there's the boundary condition. The text uses horses and donkeys to measure this.
Horses have 64 chromosomes and donkeys have 62. When they mate, they produce a mule, which is viable but completely sterile. The UTGH framework argues that this chromosomal incompatibility is proof that distinct species can emerge rapidly from a single ancestral pair. It's a living measurement showing that lineages can diverge far enough to disrupt reproduction, but recently enough to preserve hybrid vigor. And the claim is that this all happened in centuries, not millions of years.
And that leads us right into part 4, the human scattering. Prepare yourself for a pretty staggering number here, 200. The text calculates that it took a maximum of just 200 generations to produce all modern human physical diversity from a single, deeply front-loaded founding population.
To put that in perspective, the standard model requires over 1,600 generations. We're talking tens of thousands of years for our unique traits to slowly evolve as humans migrated out of Africa. But UTGH? Just roughly 200. The framework argues that 200 generations of a pristine, front-loaded genome responding to extreme environmental pressure is more than enough to produce literally every skin tone, bone structure, and physical adaptation we see in humanity today.
So how would this work? The framework suggests that as humans scattered into radically different chaotic climates after this planetary catastrophe, they became geographically isolated. Land bridges flooded, populations were cut off, and their front-loaded genomes rapidly expressed the specific survival traits needed for their new, extreme environments. Just like the Siberian winter pulled the tiger from the front-loaded feline genome, extreme equatorial UV environments pulled darker skin tones from the isolated human genome, while those in colder, low-light environments expressed lighter skin. The mirroring between animals and humans here is direct.
So you get this fascinating timeline. Instead of a slow-growing branching tree, UTGH maps our genetics as a rapid, violent record of disruption. First, you have a global catastrophe lasting for years. Then, rapid epigenetic divergence over decades as humans scattered. Next, deep geographic isolation lasting for centuries, which essentially locked in those physical traits. And finally, partial reintegration over millennia as human populations began to reconnect and travel. The author argues that the genetic distance between us isn't actually a measure of time at all. It's a measure of how thoroughly isolated we were during that extreme bottleneck.
It really forces you to ask, what if the physical differences between us aren't just random, accidental mutations that happen to stick around? What if they are beautifully calibrated survival responses that were hidden within our DNA all along, just waiting for the right environment to draw them out? It entirely shifts the narrative from one of slow, random accidents to one of immense, pre-existing potential.
Ultimately, wrapping up this explainer, we're left with a truly provocative thought. If the UTGH framework is right, and the incredible diversity in both animals and humans was expressed rapidly rather than built slowly, how does that change the way we view our shared family tree? It suggests a shared genetics that connects us all much more closely and much more recently than we might have ever imagined. So what do you think? It's definitely something to chew on. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the source material, and keep exploring.